So what you're looking at is a picture of what? An orchestra. And you've got this conductor, but she's in the middle of conducting this orchestra. She's in control. What does it take to make music, to make good music? It takes coordination. So imagine if she doesn't get this right, if she's slightly off, you could be the best violinist, somebody else could be the best pianist, somebody else could be fantastic with a saxophone or a trombone or whatever. If she doesn't bring them all together, it's just not going to sound right, is it? If you're going to be conducting an orchestra, if you're in a band, if you're trying to put something together, it's the little things that really matter, trying to get everything together. In some ways, that's a metaphor for what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about business, the nature of business over this module. And there are other modules obviously to follow on as well. And you probably have some other lecturers and me possibly through some of those. But we're going to talk about the nature of business on a number of different levels. And at its heart, what we're trying to do is to get some sort of organization to work to solve a problem, to solve a need, to meet a need, and to do that profitably for different stakeholders. For you as the business owner or the business manager, for the investors, for the customers, for the suppliers. It's about trying to get everything to work together. So that's where we're going to get into this in a number of different ways. So what is business is my sort of introduction slide here, our title for this first session. So we're going to meet at this time for the next 4 weeks. That's my name there. I'll give you some more details on me in a few minutes. And obviously we're part of the eGraduate College, this Academy activity base. What I'd like you to do is, which is going to be difficult for you, I want you to take 3 or 4 minutes and think about what business means to you and draw a picture. Now, here's the thing. There's no prizes for this, and there's no penalties for this. We're all used to answering questions and to giving an answer, either verbally or in writing. This is a little bit different. I want you to think about what business means and think about what's the image that you would draw to signify business. So you need to communicate in a different way. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes. I want you to see if you can draw it out. Put your name in the corner, just so we know who's is who, and we'll share them. But if the others, if you can do that, I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes, just see if you can draw the picture. And what I'm asking you to do is to think about what does business mean to you right now, and to draw a picture that represents that. There's no prizes. Don't worry about art. My drawing is rubbish. So I'm not looking for quality. I'm looking for the idea. 4 minutes, 3:55. So I want you to think about what business means to you and draw a picture. Okay, 4 minutes up, folks. See, got one more, 2 more here. Is to get you thinking differently. Okay, so let's see what we have. Charts, information is very important. Interaction between people going and doing to and fro from a business potentially, or to an organization. Good. Do we have any others? 2 more. Hang on. Here we go. There's no escaping here. Everybody's art gets displayed. So, Daniel, I guess that's you. Drop it a little bit. And one more. So, what I always find interesting about this is, first of all, that there are no wrong answers. There are no wrong answers. It's really a case of trying to see what things are in people's thinking. What sort of things you're considering, or what springs to mind, basically. I missed one. Hang on, I've got to put it back again. Doing the wrong thing there. So all I'm just trying to do is to make sure I can. There we go. So it's a bit like a jigsaw. Okay, and I did something wrong to this. But let me just do that one again. All right, what do you see? Look, when we look at this, what we see are different things. First of all, we see interactions, or we see people, or we see symbols, or sometimes we see structures, or sometimes we see buildings, sometimes we see vehicles, sometimes I see pictures of money. Now, I don't see any pictures of money here, which is interesting and good because business is not just about money. So let me just make it a bit bigger for you. Hopefully you can all see that now. So what I do see though, of course, is individuals. So businesses very often it involves people. People are central to this. Yes, structures or buildings, places can be really important. Possibly slightly less important than 30 or 40 years ago because obviously there's a whole virtual world that we can look at now as well. For example, we're not all in the same place. The idea of metrics or targets represented by charts or trends or whatever is another key factor. The actual transaction itself there, something going one way, something going the other way. There's lots of different elements of this, or people coordinating within an environment. So this is good. That's what I want you to start thinking about. I'm going to skip this because we have a relatively short period of time, and I'm going to jump ahead to a little bit about our introductions. So this is me. My name is Shane Downer. I'm based in Ireland, which is a lot colder than where you are generally. Also, about 6 or 7 hours, depending on where you are, behind you. So it's 9 a.m. or just after 9 a.m. my time. I've been working in education and in other areas over the last, I won't talk about how many decades, but you'll see I've got a degree in management science, a master's of business studies specializing in organizations, and an MBA as well. I've been teaching, lecturing, educating. In fact, all of my career has been around education, but formally teaching and lecturing originally, and in the last 5 years, I've been doing that. In between, I've done a lot of work with both large organizations, some of which you will know, and small organizations which you won't have any idea of, as well as having been involved in the not-for-profit sector. So these are some of the brands I've worked with. The only ones that you might be familiar with might be City and Diners Club, Citibank, which actually owns Diners Club now. I've worked with charities, I've worked with government bodies and other smaller businesses as well. Currently, I'm lecturing with different colleges and the process of setting up a startup too, which we'll talk about down the line. So that's me. If you have my philosophy on education is this, is there's no such thing as a bad question. So this only works rather than me just giving you a lecture and it being one way, this really works better if we have interaction. So I ask you to do things, or I ask you questions, and I'm looking for responses. So when we're doing this, it's really better if you can keep your cameras on if at all possible, because then I know that you're awake as opposed to you having fallen asleep. And that helps me with interaction. Plus, please do not hesitate to ask a question. You can use the little hand icon on the Zoom thing. You can speak out or you can wave at me or whatever. But there's absolutely nothing worse than having a question and not asking it. Because then you start thinking about it and you're not sure. So don't hesitate to ask a question. Don't hesitate to respond to questions or challenges I put out to you guys. And that way we start to learn from each other as well. So this is me. If you want to get in contact with me, these are some of my emails. Actually, there's another one that should be on that. Let me just fix that right now. So you got three different emails from me, Shane at thelearninglounge.ie, Shane.Downer at ibot.ie, and Shane at scorebetter.ie, which is probably the best one. You have my mobile number already. If you want to find out more about me, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's a picture of me taken quite a while ago. You'll see that that's the one you'll see on LinkedIn, actually. Here we are. So moving on. So we've done our introductions. Like I said, we've got contacts on WhatsApp. If you've got a question on any stage, you can reach out there as well. Or please don't hesitate to interrupt me. The next few slides, I'm just going to run through pretty quickly because they're all in the module descriptor, and I'm going to give you a document anyway, but just to sort of position where we're at. So the aim of this module is that you get a foundational understanding of business and how it operates. We're going to talk a little bit about local versus global, because obviously there are some large trends that we need to think about, which means we want to look at how we develop our knowledge and skills so that we can plan and set up and ultimately grow a business. It says a small business, but all businesses start small. So it's a question of where we go and how we can scale the business. So we're going to look at things like business structure, business models a little bit. There's another module later on where all the modules later on we get into more of this stuff. This is just an introduction piece, but we'll look at structures, including the legal structures. So what, for example, is the difference or the benefit of being a limited company or not? And what does that look like? And what does that mean? So we'll look at things like legal structures as well as organizational structures. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the rules because there are rules. And our rules are not always the same. The rules are not always complied with, but there are rules and there are probably good practices that we need to look at. And the idea is how, if you learn about these things, how can we apply them to any business, to existing or to startup businesses? So those are our aims. So we're going to focus over the next 4 weeks on these sort of things here. First of all, we're going to do some of the basic nitty-gritty stuff after today, which is around different types of business organizations and their purposes and the roles in the economy. So a little bit about where the game is played and who the players are. So if you think about soccer, on a soccer pitch, we have 22 players from two different teams. Each has a goalie, and then they've got 10 other players who are in different positions. And of course, you've got a referee and you've got two sideline umpires, whatever you call them, lines people. And so we talk about the place where business is played, the pitch, the organization, the environment, those type of things. Leading on from that, we're going to talk about stakeholder influences because no business exists in isolation. It can't. So we've got to talk about who has influence, who should we be taking caution with or be aware of, or who should we be engaging with, and so on. A little bit about ethical practice and also the external business environment. And we'll touch base briefly on that today, but we'll talk about more about these things next week. And then third stage will be around the planning and establishing a small business, the process we might go through in terms of identifying opportunities and looking at really it's feeding into decision making. Do we do it or do we not do it? What's the squeal point? At which point should we stop? At which point should we go ahead? And then talk about how we might go and develop a realistic business case to launch a business. So those are the topics we're going to cover over the coming weeks. And we're trying to take one of these each week. So today and tomorrow is around this introduction and then the different business types and so on. We have an hour each session, so it is fairly tight. I don't expect you to read this. I'm just showing it to you in that there is a structure between the learning outcomes, there's 8 learning outcomes, and then there's some assessment criteria against each of those. So I'm not going to even dwell on this. So those learning outcomes on the left, here's what they are. Understand different types and purposes of business organizations. So we don't talk about that today and tomorrow. And how businesses are structured and operate. So again, this is that first piece. I'm not going to read through all of this because you guys can read slides just as well as I can. So I'm just going to show you that it's there so that we can be cognizant. You need to read on it after the class. So you'll get a PDF of the slides, as well as I'll add some notes to that occasionally. So this is the same thing again. Types and purposes of business and organization structures and functions is this week. Stakeholders and external business environment next week. Legal and ethical requirements and characteristics of entrepreneurs, of which some of you are entrepreneurs. Some of us are entrepreneurs in week 3. And then planning and looking at risk management and business feasibility in week 4. So let's get back into today's discussion. And I'm glad, I think, actually, you said it, it's not just about the money. Most people, when you think about business, we think we have to focus on this equation. And it's an equation. Sales minus cost equals profit. And that's the profit motive. Now, this is the core equation underpinning accounting, if you like. Sales minus cost equals profit. But it's far more complex than this, I think. Yes, of course, profit is what we want to make. Is profit the only outcome? What does profit look like? Now, those are some things that we need to think about. If we pursue profit to all extents beyond anything else, is that where we want to be? Or are there implications in terms of environment or society or stakeholders or whatever? So this simple equation drives business in some ways, but we really need to unpick it a bit more. Now, if we just stick with the equation for a second, and yeah, we do want to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with making a profit. How do we increase our profit? There's only 2 ways. And what will that lead to? Because you're right, but how does it help us here? What does that yield? you have an opportunity to increase sales. So increasing profit comes about if we increase sales, or can happen if we increase sales. And how we increase sales, it could be that we do exactly that. Look at what we do and see what the customer needs and improve our branding, improve our outputs, provide better services. What's the other way that we can increase profits?
Reduce costs.
Yeah, that's it. To increase profits, we either increase sales or we reduce costs, or a combination of both. But when we start to think about those things, it does lead us into that very sort of discussion. How do we increase sales? How do we reduce costs? Or how do we find a better balance between these things? And if you think about the sales, how do we increase sales? Again, there's only two ways to increase sales. I take your point, what you're saying, but actually mathematically, the only way we increase sales is by either raising the price or selling more product or more services. And now we go back into how do we increase the price, or how do we get more people to buy? Or again, maybe it's a case that we slightly reduce the price and that increases the number of people who buy to such an extent that it creates more sales. So we can start to unpick this equation and start looking at all the things that that leads to. And that's where we go with the module, because really we need to be thinking about how do we grow our business sales, and how do we make sure that we provide whatever our output is as effectively and efficiently as possible, which is back into the cost side of things. And that doesn't mean just the cheapest material. It means how do we do it better? So we're going to look at these things over time. So some of the concepts that will influence us here are then, of course, the market. And the market is almost like this thing we talk about, the market, that it's this living, embryonic, organic thing. The market is where the game is played and decisions are made by people that we have to interact with, either our suppliers or our customers, our competitors, our staff, or whatever. So the market is a space where things happen. And the market is better if it's informed, if people know what's going on, which also links into this idea of freedom of choice, that the customer can choose. We don't live, most of us around the world are not part of a planned economy. We live in a free economy, or in an economy where there are various freedoms and there are some elements of market and some elements of choice. And where there's choice, then our challenge as a business becomes, it's actually better because it forces us to be better. It means that we've got to figure out how do we encourage people to make the choices we want them to make. Of course, we might talk about risk and reward, and we'll talk about that in the last section, the idea of risk. And that's going to be central to when we talk about types of businesses and the idea of a company. And what a limited company is this idea about taking risks for reward. Innovation, I think, is crucial to any business startup. And a number of you talked about the fact that you want to start businesses, or you're running, or you have businesses. So innovation is crucial. Innovation is my favorite topic, to be honest. It's about how do we move things forward, basically. Some of that can be around solving societal problems. So whether you're working in a not-for-profit sector. And by the way, when I talk about business, it doesn't, the profit aspect isn't just cash. It can be better outcomes for investors, for donors, for governments, or whatever. So anything we talk about is applicable to a for-profit business, to a state-provided service or activity, or to a charity or not-for-profit or voluntary organization. Because it's actually the same problems, just with different levels of resources and focus. Which brings us on to resources and productivity. We will talk about the nature of value, value add. If you think about it, we've all bought something at some stage, haven't we? When was the last time you bought something and you weren't happy with your purchase? Does that happen? Are you likely to go back to that vendor again? No. So you haven't achieved value. And in not providing that value, the vendor's possibly lost a customer, or certainly the relationship is damaged. So we'll talk about the idea of value. We might talk about the tragedy of the commons, which is to do with sustainability. And ultimately, everything we do will be underpinned by the stories that we tell. And I'll tell you some stories about as we go along, and I'll be looking for you to add your stories too. So these are some of the concepts and considerations we're going to talk about. What's happening here?
The shops are all closed. There are no customers.
So that could happen on a certain day of the week. I live in Dublin in Ireland. So in Dublin, Ireland, there are some parts of the city on a Sunday morning. This is what it's like. But I'm talking about something particular, something big that's happened recently. What might this be a picture of? Something
The
we've all lived through. You're right, first of all, about the buildings, that there could be different elements, different strategies, stratuses or statuses and so on. But the pandemic is actually, this picture was from the pandemic period. So during the pandemic, we had this massive upheaval. And the youngest of you might have been 12 at the time, 13 or 14 or 15 or 16, whatever, but you still remember what it was like. Did we all experience a lockdown of some sort or other? Or some limitations? So imagine that you're running your business at that time and that happens. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for your business? How do you survive? How do you meet your customers' needs? How do you adapt? So for me, the pandemic is a great lesson for all of us because it was this sudden thing. It was relatively sudden, and we all had to adapt. And as a result, some businesses didn't make it. Obviously, there was lots of tragedy in terms of people who lost their lives. I don't want to minimize that at all. But from an organizational setting, a job setting, a profitability, a business survivability, there were lots of implications. For some businesses, it was positive. For most businesses, it was a very difficult time. So something happens that can affect our business. And we kind of need, if we think about sales minus cost equals profit, we also need to think about where the game is played, when the game is played, and what's happening and what might happen. So we need to think about that sort of context. Ultimately, what we're here to learn is what is business? Who is involved? Who are the players? How does it actually work? Now, we all know how it works at a functioning level, but actually, when we start to get in and we pick it apart, maybe there's things that we learn that can help us even better. How do we know if we're running a business? How do we know if we're doing well? So, how do we keep score? Does anybody play sports? Like team sports like soccer? So, soccer is the easiest game. You keep score. It's how many goals you have versus how many the opposition have. That's how we keep score. I don't play it anymore, but I used to play rugby, which is a little bit more complex because there's different points for different activities. If you play tennis, again, it's a relatively simple calculation, but it's points to games to sets. So how do we keep score? How do we know if we're doing well? How do we do that in a business sense? Also, how do we work with others? So how do we actually structure a business? How do we create relationships and roles, etc.? Are there rules that we have to comply with? And then ultimately, how do we get started? That's what we're about in this module. Which brings me to this. Peter Drucker, it's a picture of a guy called Peter Drucker who died about 20 years ago. In many ways, he is one of the gurus of management. So he is one of these academics who wrote extensively about business. And he shaped a lot of thinking about business and management over time. So he's still very relevant. But one of the things that I found really interesting is very close to the end of his life, about 25 years ago, when somebody was looking to write a book about him and his thinking and so on. One of the comments he made to her was, we actually need a new theory of management. The assumptions built into business today are not accurate. And that's 20 something years ago. I think today this is even more applicable because what we're dealing with now is radically different to 50 years ago. It's still relatively quite significantly different to 25 years ago, even somewhat different to 10 years ago, and will be different in 5 or 10 years' time. If you're a software engineer, you're seeing a lot of changes happening in your world. We all are. AI is the classic example, as well as other things. So we see change around us, and that means that some of the old assumptions are no longer relevant, are no longer accurate. So we need to think about that. So Drucker was telling us 20 years ago, look, we need to look at this. What he had articulated as a theory of management 50 years ago, and 60 years ago, and 40 years ago, some of the ideas he had written about, which are still relevant in some ways, we need to build on those ideas because things are changing so fast. And the pandemic is a clear example of that. AI is another example of that. These sort of things are changing who we are and what we're about. So we're going to spend some time looking at that, particularly next week. Let's get you guys involved in a question. Given all of that, given that sort of an introduction, the idea of sales minus cost equals profit, the idea that we live in a dynamic environment, what is the one mandatory requirement for any business?
Product.
Product, okay.
You need money to start a business, any sort of business.
So product, money. Anything else?
Legally
Customers. And sorry,
Organization.
licensed.
License. Ideas. Okay.
Capital.
Capital. Anything else?
Giving a cost.
I-
The cost.
Keeping the cost.
Yes.
Marketing.
Anything else?
Employees.
Leading and leadership.
For software, probably security.
Haven't heard that one in a while. The answer I'm looking for is not actually any one of these things.
Oh,
Sustainability.
courage.
Adaptability.
These are all actually really good, really good. And you're right, we need these things. It's not the one mandatory thing, though. So a profitability or a business model. Okay, good. No, that's still
Location.
not it, though. Location. Again, somebody came in there, just somebody said planning, somebody else said something else.
I think compliance.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Strategy.
Leadership we have. Partnership.
And strategy.
Strategy. These are all really important, really important. And it's hard to see how you survive or you make progress without all of these things or some of these things. What I'm looking for, though, is more basic. And actually, some businesses, they don't have a business model. Some businesses don't worry about compliance. Some businesses get started with very little capital or money. Some businesses, you don't need a license. Some businesses, you don't need employees. You can be self-employed. So there are options around this. But the one I'm looking for, and I'm not denigrating these because I think these are all really good and you're definitely all thinking about it. The one I'm looking for is this. We need a paying customer. The one thing we must have is a paying customer. Now, yes, we did have customers here, but to be very specific, we need a customer who's going to pay us because we can have any number of customers who are not paying customers. People will take our product and not pay us on occasion. So we need a customer who wants what we have and is willing to pay us. I love this picture. I stole this picture. I didn't take it, but I found it on the web. But I saw this in Hanoi, something like this in Hanoi, and I thought, this is perfect. This is the perfect little business. So what do we have here? We have somebody who's providing a service, aren't they? I call him the street barber. He's providing a basic service. His costs are really low. Does he have a market? It depends on the number of other barbers and hairdressing salons and whatever out there. But the reality is, as long as there are humans, there'll be hair. And some people, we want our hair cut. Some of us, I know, need a bit more. I'm not even going to go there, right? But in this particular case, this guy has a great little business because he has a market. There are people who want their hair cut. Not everybody will want him to cut their hair. They'll want a more established business. But there'll be others who, yeah, you know what? I just need a trim. And if you're going to be one of his customers, you're probably going to be looking to get your hair cut every 2, 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe every couple of months, as long as it's growing. Some people want always to be in the same sort of neat shape. Is it an expensive service? No. But there's plenty of potential customers if you're located in a city or an urban area. Because you have a lot of costs. It's pretty low level of costs. In terms of plant and equipment, he needs a chair, which looks like an old discarded office chair, maybe. He needs a couple of tools, so sets of scissors and combs. He needs a plastic sheet to shake off the hair. The luxuries are the mirror. He needs a mirror so the customer can see themselves, because that's what helps the customer feel good. Everything else is a bonus, really. So in this particular case, he's got a little box where probably he keeps his stuff, and he's got a stand where he turns up in the morning, he puts his box on the tree, and he's got his chair, and he's set up for the day. And then he's going to have people coming by, and he'll be able to cut their hair. He's got a couple of add-ons, a little bit of value add there, maybe some ointments or creams or whatever. In addition, if you follow the wire, looks like he's got one of those little electric strimmers. So you get a little bit of trimming going on. Now, to do that, he needs power, which means the wire probably goes up and across into the building behind. Maybe he's given a couple of dollars to the business to look the other way, just to plug in the thing, because he's not a big draw on power, but just needs a little bit, and it's an add-on to his service. Maybe a couple of those dollars are to keep away the cops or whatever. I don't know if he needs a license or not, but to keep the store behind happy, so he's got passing trade. That's his business. He's got paying customers. People come along, they pay him a couple of dollars or whatever it is, and they get their hair cut. And he can probably do, I don't know what, 3 an hour for 8 hours a day, 24 customers, 4 or 5 days a week, 6 days a week maybe. So he's got a basic business, and it's not complicated. And he's got paying customers, and he's got low costs. It's a simple business. Now, if we look at Apple computers, or we look at NVIDIA, or we look at Tesla Motor Company, or we look at the Ford Motor Company, or we look at, I don't know, Delta Airlines or Malaysia Airlines, those are much more complicated businesses. But they have the same basic elements. They have to have the same basic element. They have to have paying customers. They have to have the means to give those customers what they want. And they need an ability to do it time and time and time again. That is the essence of what we're looking to sort out. So if we start from the simplest building blocks, we can build up any business. That's my thinking. And partly what we're looking at is theory and recognizing theory in reality. But I think if you come back to this, this is central to everything that we're talking about. So what is business? We can define business as the activity of making one's living or making money by producing or buying and selling products. For products, we read goods or services. So buying and selling products means buying and selling physical things or buying and selling services. And buying a service can be paying somebody to provide the service. And we enter into it for a profit. So that bit's a little bit, like I said, not every organization is about making a financial profit. But we enter into it in some ways to try and generate some excess. It can be an organizational system where goods or services are exchanged. So our traditional retail is probably our first ever experience of business. I want a soda, I go to the store, I buy a can of soda. I want a bottle of water, I buy it from a street merchant. I want my haircut. I want to go from here to here, I pay for a taxi or I buy a bicycle or whatever. So extending out of that idea, we talk about things like investment. We talk about enterprise and entrepreneurship. We talk about capacity in terms of what does it take. So if I'm driving a taxi, my core resources are, I need a vehicle. I need a vehicle, I probably need insurance. I most likely need access to a fuel source or an ongoing fuel source, whether it's plug-in for electricity or petrol or gasoline or diesel or whatever. And I probably need a radio or I need an internet connection these days so that I can be plugged into picking up a passenger who's looking for a ride. Because a taxi service is about matching this person with this journey. And actually, it's really interesting. And Nisa, you'll appreciate this possibly. We'll all probably appreciate this. But the growth of Uber or Free Now or whatever ride share business operates in your country. In Malaysia, is it Gojek? Is that one? Grab. So if you step back 10 years, Grab didn't exist. So how did it work? Started out, people had taxis and a thing on the roof of the car and you wave them down. Or they had bought into a radio system and people called up, said, I need a taxi at this address. And the base station radioed out to see, is anybody in the area? Grab, removes that base station and those office workers and replaces it with an app. But it's the same idea. So how do we do that? How do we provide a service? What do we need? We actually need to be a service provider on Grab. Or Airbnb is the same thing. We need to talk about the exchange and, of course, the profit or the outcome from the business. So we could talk about this in this terms, or we could talk about the essence of business, which I think is more relevant, particularly if you're thinking entrepreneurially. It's about solving problems, the problems of customers. And we're going to stop there because we're just up at time now, and we'll pick this up tomorrow and we'll take this further.
Yep.
Everybody happy?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.